Today on the Level Plumbing Square, we'll build this easel out of recycled wine barrel staves. Today in the shop, we're going to be building an easel out of recycled wine barrel staves. This will also give me an opportunity to try out the latest addition to my shop, a Domino XL. For the project, you're only going to need 5 wine barrel staves, a hinge, and then some fasteners of your choice, and you'll see how that works out as we go along. You want to start by selecting 4 barrel staves that are similar in width and hoop pattern if possible. Now I like to pre-sand all the pieces of the easel to at least 120 grit. Using scrap material, I set up a stop about 60 inches from the end of my workbench, and then I laid down some painter's tape to get a good center line. I can lay out the legs in a nice S shape, and using the stop in the center line helps me make sure that everything is as close to identical as I can, because I need to build 2 of these legs. Once the legs are laid out in an S-shaped fashion, I'm going to tape them together as tightly as I can. And I'm going to want to do this in a couple of places. Once both legs have been joined with tape, I can mark them for cutting. And I want to do this as close to the center as possible, which is going to be about 30 inches. At this point, I can just take them to the chop saw and cut them to length. To make sure I keep the pairs together, I'm going to mark them appropriately. Because barrel staves aren't consistent in their width or thickness, I need to mark a face side on each one, and I'm just going to do that with some green tape. I want to make sure I mark the inside of one stave and the outside of the other stave. Also, I can use this tape to mark the center of the board for the domino. Using the domino, I can now cut a mortise for the loose tenons. In this case, I'm cutting a mortise to receive a 12 by 100 domino. If you're using a wider staves, you can use multiple dominoes to provide added strength. In most cases, the dominoes tend to hold the pieces together tightly enough that during a glue-up that you don't really need clamps. However, if you feel like you do, I've just clamped a couple of pieces of scrap stave to each barrel stave, and I can put that together, and then I can run an auxiliary clamp that will go over the top of both of those and hold everything together. To glue this up, I'm just going to apply glue to my domino. I can insert that in. I'll apply more glue to the end area, although that's not going to do a lot of good. And then I just want to make sure I get everything lined up. It's just a matter of adding the clamps. Set this aside to dry. Now that the 2 front legs of the easel have dried and I've taken them out of the clamps, I have them laid out on the workbench. In order to hold the legs to their correct width, I need to place a wedge at the top. And for that, I've just cut a scrap piece of wood that's approximately a 1/2 inch thick, 6 inches long, and roughly the same width as the legs. I just kind of set that in place and marked out the material that I want to remove. And I will do that at the bandsaw. After rough cutting at the bandsaw, I cleaned up the wedge with a hand plane, and now I have it clamped in a vise, and I need to dish this out so it'll conform to the shape of the barrel stave. And to do that, I'm going to be using this abrasive wheel on my grinder. This is a Kutzall, and this is the fine wheel, and it does a great job removing the material. If you don't have one of these, you can always use a belt sander. Once the wedge is formed, I can clamp the assembly together, and then I can drill holes to receive the copper nails that I'm going to use for the rivets. In this case, I'm using a number 9 3-inch copper nail that I got from Jamestown Distributing. A quick tip, whenever you drill a hole, make sure you put the nail in right away, and that way you make sure everything stays lined up and nothing can slip on you. Now that I have all the nails in place, I've set them up on an anvil that I'll be using as a buck for the riveting process. The next thing I want to do is I want to drive on these little copper washers. These are called burrs, and I'll just set that in place, and I have a rove that I can drive it on with. That'll make sure everything is held in place. Now that I've driven the burrs into place, I'm going to go ahead and trim the remaining nail down to within about 1/8 of an inch or so of the burr. If you look closely at the end of the rove, you're going to see there's two sides to it. One side has a hole, and that hole actually goes through and comes out the side over here, and that'll use that when you're driving the burr on, and that way the end of the nail has some place to go. The other side just has a simple divot that I can place over the end of the cut nail, or rivet in this case, and use that to start to establish that mushroom shape. And I'll go ahead and do that now. Just a couple hits, all it takes.
I can now peen the end to the desired shape that I'm looking for.
In order to mark the location of the shelf, I stood the legs up, and now I'll just use a level and run it across both sides. And I'm going to try to make the shelf go across this joint here and kind of hide that. The shelf itself is just going to be made out of a couple of pieces of scrap wood from the barrel lid that will be screwed and glued together in kind of an L-shaped fashion. But before I do that, I want to mark the thickness on the legs themselves. Because the legs are tapered, it doesn't sit real flush, and by doing this I can remove some material and allow the shelf to sit flush to the legs. Using a flush trim saw and a chisel, I've made just a shallow notch that gives me a nice slip fit for the shelf itself. Before I attach the L to the shelf, I want to mark for the pocket screws that are actually going to hold the shelf to the legs. And I'll do that by just making sure that it's even on both sides. And then I can mark it to receive a screw that will go right into the legs. Now that all the holes have been drilled, I can attach the stop or the L portion of the shelf. I'm just going to do that with some glue and screws. Now that the shelf assembly has been completed, I can attach it to the legs just using some 1.5" pocket screws. We can now plug all of the holes. We're now ready to attach the support leg, and we're going to do that with this T-hinge. We're going to start by attaching it to the bottom of the support shelf. To make it easier to attach, the first thing I'm going to do is just clamp a block of wood under here. This will hold everything in place and steady while I get it centered. To drill the holes, I'm just using a Vicks bit. With the hinge attached to the bottom of the support shelf, I can now attach the leg. I want to try to do it so that the edge of the bevel here kind of matches up right there with the edge of the support shelf. And there we have it. By positioning the leg the way we did, I now use the bevel from the stave as a stop against the support shelf when I stand the easel up. The last thing we need to do is cut the legs to final length. To cut the legs to final length, I've just set some blocks on the front legs till I got the appropriate angle for the easel. And now I've just set some dividers, and I'll go around and mark all 3 legs, get them all cut off at the same height. Well, that's about as far as we're going to get on this project. I admit I did have to do a little bit of fritzing to get the stance just the way I wanted it, but other than that, it turned out really good. Now I will sand this to about 150 grit and then put a couple coats of oil on it. The only thing left to do now is to add some artwork. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please feel free to email me at andrew@thelevelplumbingsquare.com. Until next time, enjoy your day.